Aye, what a year it's been. For us personally, for our communities, and for climate change. It's been over a year since we all met for the first time back in November 2020. So I'd like to take a few minutes to reflect on what's happened over the past year, what you achieved in the Climate Assembly, the developments in science and policy, and looking forward, how we can collectively build on your work. First, let me start with you, Scotland's Climate Assembly. Over 7 weekends from November to March 2021, you listened to expert evidence, you discussed and you deliberated. It was intense, it was eye-opening. Sometimes there was frustration with the process, sometimes it was energising. You heard about the scientific background to climate change, you heard about different levels of action, governments, business, local authorities, civic society. You heard about the role of government policy and finance in influencing our actions and agreed what fair should look like. You covered specific activities being done now to reduce greenhouse gases in workplaces, travel, home, communities, through our consumption of products and services, and in our diets and land use in Scotland. And you dived into detailed ideas on how Scotland might change to tackle the climate emergency in a fair and effective way. This included changing how we travel by land, which is responsible for around a third of Scotland's greenhouse gas emissions, as well as travel by air. Changing existing homes, as well as changing how we build new homes. Scotland's homes are responsible for around 15% of its greenhouse gas emissions. And how we might rebalance our diets and how we might change our use of land. Just under a quarter of Scotland's greenhouse gas emissions are from agriculture and related land use. However, as Professor Mike Berners-Lee told you, there are greenhouse gas emissions in nearly everything we buy and do. And therefore you also covered more profound questions. How should Scotland change its working practices and support its people to change work? How should Scotland change the way it plans communities? Or the way we buy things, our use of resources and materials. And how should Scotland measure success as a country and of the businesses that operate in it? At the end of this process, the Assembly published an interim report with your statement of ambition and 16 overarching goals. Then in June, your full report was published, putting 81 recommendations to the Scottish Government. While the Scottish Government was reflecting on their response to the Assembly recommendations, the wider world was gearing up for what was anticipated to be one of the most important meetings ever on climate change, hosted in Glasgow in November. New developments in climate science were highlighted in August, which saw the publication of the first part of the 6th report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. And there was a number of key messages from this report. One was that we are on course to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius warming by 2040. So that under all the emission scenarios outlined in the IPCC report, the Earth's surface warming is projected to reach 1.5 or 1.6 degrees in the next 2 decades. Therefore, urgent action is required now to reduce emissions. The second one was about greenhouse gas emissions from human activity and the fact that they're driving extreme weather events. So this year has seen an increasing number of well-publicised weather events. It's wildfires in the US and southern Europe and even in Siberia, destructive flooding in many parts of the globe, and extreme heat, tropical cyclones. Even in Scotland we had experienced some wild weather, Storm Arwen and the warmest Hogmanay ever. So it's increasingly clear that such events, which destroyed so many homes, livelihoods last year, are being worsened by climate change. The latest IPCC report, which is its first since 2014, reiterates that human influence has warmed the climate at a rate that is unprecedented for at least the last 2,000 years. Climate change is already affecting every inhabited region across the globe, with human influence contributing to many observed changes in weather and climate extreme. In the future, projected changes in extremes, in droughts, heavy rainfall, heat, each of which brings huge human and financial costs, are larger in frequency and intensity with every additional increment of warming. There's also important aspects about tackling methane emissions. Methane, which is released into the atmosphere from agricultural waste and the extraction and burning of fossil fuels, has a very significant impact on global warming in the short term. So a quick reduction in methane would give humanity a quick win, if you like, and that methane's received far less attention from governments than carbon dioxide. But a fourth one is perhaps the biggest outcome really of the latest IPCC assessment is the recognition that the risks of negative climate impacts from global warming of 2 degrees would be much more widespread compared with 1.5 degrees. And that's why the UN Secretary General called the report a code red for humanity. So how has the world responded? Well, every year, almost every country sends a delegation to the Conference of the Parties, the COP, of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And this year was the 26th meeting, so it was known as COP26, and it was held in Glasgow in November. There was lots of media coverage with a focus on ambition as the range of organisations and businesses set out their commitment to net zero. And for those who were in Glasgow, a fair bit of disruption with global leaders and a range of celebrities attending. There were high hopes for the meeting, which was the most important one since the COP held in Paris in 2015. Now at Paris, countries had agreed a legally binding treaty to limit global warming to well below 2 and preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. To reach 1.5 degrees requires countries to reach global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions, followed quickly by a rapid reduction for the world to reach climate neutrality by mid-century. It was a landmark in the multilateral government process because for the first time a binding agreement brought all countries into common cause to combat climate change and adapt to its effects. It works on a 5-year ratchet, a cycle of increasingly ambitious climate action carried out by countries. They need to submit national plans, NDCs in the jargon, for how they will contribute to the global effort. COP26 in Glasgow was the first opportunity to ratchet up climate ambition from Paris. The recent developments in science led to a shift in emphasis in the Glasgow meeting to focus on achieving the 1.5 degrees target for global warming rather than the 2 degrees which had been the priority previously. And the agreed Glasgow Pact did achieve a ratchet up in ambition despite well publicised disagreements between global leaders. But it didn't do enough to set the world on course to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. Those plans proposed in Glasgow, even if enacted in full, may get warming below 2 degrees, but not 1.5 degrees. The trajectory of climate change from current real-world policies is estimated to be around 2.7 degrees warming. In other words, far more climate action is required to meet the commitments made in Glasgow. The Glasgow COP did provide momentum to several important side issues. So, for example, halting and reversing forest loss and land degradation. The finance industry, through the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which now covers $130 trillion of assets under management, agreed to reach net zero emissions in relation to its investments by 2050. And there was also an agreement on reducing methane by 30% by 2030. So while the Glasgow Pact did not deliver actions to meet the 1.5 degrees target, it did keep that prospect within reach. National governments have been asked to come back next year. The COP will be held in Egypt in 2022, with revised plans to deliver on their promises. Much of the positive output from COP26 was because of the efforts and convergence of what are called non-state actors, subnational governments, cities, regions, businesses, financial investors, who are setting out to reduce emissions and build resilience within the 2020s. This is focused on the real actions required to decarbonise key sectors, turning pledges into reality, such as the ones that you discussed in the Climate Assembly. Now, back in Scotland, there have been a suite of climate-related announcements in recent months. That includes the Scottish Government accepted the recommendation of the Just Transition Commission and a new commission has been established to support and scrutinise transition plans. The SNP and Green Party published their cooperation agreement for power sharing in the Scottish Parliament in August. And this included announcements of investing £5 billion on decarbonising Scotland's railways, a £500 million 10-year Just Transition Fund to support people to transition to greener jobs in the North East and Moray, and £1.5 billion to improve the energy efficiency of Scotland's homes and decarbonise heating. Then there was the Scottish Government's Programme for Government plan for the forthcoming year, which was published in September. This included announcements on investing 10% of the government's transport budget on active travel by 2024-2025 and investing £150 million to accelerate progress towards the Scottish Government's target of planting 18,000 hectares of trees a year by 2024. The Scottish Government's Heat and Building Strategy was published in October and included targets to retrofit all homes to EPC by 2033, reduce emissions from heat and buildings by 68% by 2030, and convert over 1 million homes to zero emissions by 2030. However, in their yearly progress report, the Committee on Climate Change, who are the government's independent advisors, highlighted areas where the Scottish Government should go further. This included the rate of peatland restoration, policies to promote healthier low-carbon diets and reduce the consumption of meat and dairy, and policies to reduce flying. So there's been a lot of change over the last year. More clarity from the scientists on the urgency of climate change, more targets set by politicians, more commitments and real action from businesses, investors, cities and regions to tackle it. But while commitments and targets are important, what really matters is having all the climate actions in place to achieve those commitments. Without them, we have what's been called a credibility gap. You'll have a chance shortly to consider how the Scottish Government has responded to your recommendations. But I think what the last year has shown is that the time for pledges is over. The time for doing is here. And this should be the legacy of Scotland's Climate Assembly.